this session. This session is going to be targeted to anybody that has a business need to create standardized processes or templates through Teams. So think repeatable objects, repeatable team rooms, chat rooms, something that you can spin up very quickly and throw away once a project is done or once an activity is done. As Don mentioned, the next slide here, this is all the sponsors. Unfortunately, we can't meet you in person today, but go check out our website if you guys want to learn more about SkyNorth. So on today's call, it's going to be myself, Scott Kyser, and Lief Olson. I'll introduce myself. So I'm a founder of a company called SkyNorth Software. We're a Microsoft Gold partner. We've been in business now for going on our 3rd year. Prior to starting SkyNorth, we were actually at Microsoft on the Fargo campus. I did that for 9 years, and I had a multitude of different roles. I was in SharePoint support escalations. I was a technical support lead for the SharePoint team. I jumped over to what Microsoft used to call a premier field engineer. I was dedicated to Best Buy, Target, and General Mills, all over the city's area that everybody's probably familiar with. And then the last role at Microsoft is actually a TSP, or Technical Solutions Professional. That's a pre-sales engineer that helps people through different Azure services, different EMS services, and Office 365 services where I targeted. Lief, if you want to jump in and introduce yourself quick?
Sure, yeah. So similar story to Scott. I was at Microsoft for about 10 years. Grew up in the SharePoint escalation team, technical support lead for the first main part of it. And then the last 4 years, I was a premier field engineer, dedicated to, large customers like Cargill or JP Morgan Chase. Those were my 2 large ones. Focused on a lot on the Office 365 and Azure side of things.
Yep, thanks, Lief. And Lief, just like me, we were the 2 founding partners of SkyNorth. Just seeing kind of where the cloud was going and everything, we decided to jump into our own business, and we do a lot of Minneapolis-based business work. I will say that this topic today has been something that has kept us really busy. We're seeing a lot of, people wanting to do this repeatable stuff, wanting to be the same, not wanting it to have data sprawl and stuff all over Office 365. And so hopefully that's why everybody's in here, to come up with that standardized solution. So going forward, this course, just some expectations. I would say this is going to be 200 to 300 level content. We are going to be talking about a lot of PowerShell, the Azure automation. We're going to be doing some flow stuff in there. It shouldn't be anything too major, too really low level stuff. So, hopefully everybody's in that range. And then really the flow of this presentation is going to be talking about discovering the problem. So what is the problem at hand, whether that's a business problem or a technical problem. Proving the ROI of that problem, and ROI meaning return on investment. Then how do we architect a solution? How do we create the solution and deploy it? And then, of course, there's going to be lots and lots of demos towards the second half here. Questions are welcomed, like Don mentioned. I think Don is going to stay on this call. If not, Lief or I are going to be alternating speaking here. So if you have questions, paste in the chat window. One of us will field it and interrupt the speaker if we need to jump in and clarify something. Okay, so going into discovering the problem. So really, the things that we should think about here if we're talking about automating tasks is what causes us to want to automate tasks, okay? And some of the things that I was thinking about as I was putting this together are really problems at the core of Office 365. And by problems, they're not major problems. It's just something everybody's probably run into. Okay, so those problems I could think of consist of the fact that Microsoft loves to sell you licenses in groups, right? They give you an M365 license, an EMS license, an O365 E1, E3. Those are big bucket licenses, but they're grouped with a whole lot of other features. Some features that you might not know about, some features that you might not even need, okay? But when you assign that user a license, more than likely it's at that higher level, and more than likely they're going to have all of these features enabled, okay? And so if you think of that, people are going to basically test new things. They're going to try new things. They might enable new things. So if you run into that scenario what we would recommend is maybe disabling those licenses you don't need, even disable the possibility for trial licenses for those users, because data sprawl is one thing that leads you into this automated solution, right? Finding a standardized solution for things. The other problem is that there's many similar technologies, right? There's Teams, there's Yammer, there's SharePoint, there's Groups, there's OneDrive, right? There's just so much stuff that Microsoft is bolting into Office 365. Your end users may not know which one they should use for which solution, right? And again, if we can automate something, if we can get large user adoption and this really simplified solution, users are going to just naturally gravitate towards that one method versus trying to find their other method. Data is duplicated, right? I mean, how many of you on this call, and I'm guilty of it, have taken an email attachment and then dropped it into your OneDrive, but then you keep both of it? Right. So it's just kind of silly to do that when you have one location for data, one location for email, and you're still doing that operation. Think of that from the automation side, right? If you didn't have to use your email so much, if you didn't have to use these multiple systems and you had a one-stop shop, you could concentrate on keeping that data into one spot. And then, of course, everybody runs into, just the lack of governance, the lack of training and oversight of Office 365. Right, I'm sure everybody's guilty of it. Your organization that you're a part of maybe doesn't know the needs and invest properly there. But when that happens, your users are going to go out and explore. They're going to go out and enable things. They're going to do things maybe that they shouldn't do. So if you're the administrator of that organization, you're kind of pulling your hair out and you're saying, "Oh my gosh, why are you doing this?" Well, maybe they just didn't know, right? So there's that problem too. And then, of course, we're here to talk about teams primarily today. And teams and groups are open for creation by default. And so if you spin up a new tenant, or if you're joining an organization part of a new tenant, by default, people can just go into Outlook. They can create a team. They can go into Teams and create a team. It's not shut off. And I know that when myself and Lief work with organizations, we find a lot of companies who find out, wow, we have a lot of teams out there we didn't even know about. Or wow, there is a ton of O365 groups that contain SharePoint sites and mailboxes and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it puts up this big red flag, right? We got to slow this down and bring it back in.
Yeah, I would even expand on that, Scott. How many times do we go into our organization and there's, 10 teams called My Team, right? So we'll be going over a lot of the depth of doing like a Teams project site, but think maybe smaller, right? So if you put different governance around just the creation of teams, you can control, naming, approval, different items before you kind of release it to the wild. So then your users can use it, adopt it, get comfortable with it, and then you can look at opening it up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and as users get comfortable with these, approved solutions that they don't need to go out and hunt for, they're going to naturally gravitate towards that. They're going to want to use that and want to make that one solution better versus, some of these problems that you could be running into with the bigger picture of Office 365. So as far as discovering the problem, right? Everybody is probably familiar with the past things we talked about, but really, you as an IT leader or as a team member or as a business user, you need to find the opportunities that are going to be targeted to this situation, that are going to be meant for automating, okay? And so just some advice: be plugged into your team activities. Find out how your actual business users and your people and your employees are using Office 365 and day-to-day operations. If you are focused just on the IT side, or you're an IT administrator, Office 365 administrator, Microsoft promised you're not going to lose your job. It just might change a little bit, right? Everybody remembers that. Get involved in the business side a little bit more and figure out how you can start solving business problems to eventually save your company money instead of just solving IT problems. Look for repeatable operations that could benefit from Office 365 and specifically Teams. Okay, if people are doing things very repetitively, how much time does that take them? What are they spending on that from day to day or in a month-long vision? Identify those operations. And then once you've found those operations, document it. Make sure people know about it. If it's some silly process that they're doing, that you say, hey, this just is taking you way too long to do. This should be a lot more simple than it is. document it. Document the project, the procedure, the purpose. And by that, I mean the project is, if our example in this today is, let's say you're involved in a road construction project. Your job is to be responsible with fixing I-494 every single summer that me and Lief come down, right? That is project. Maybe you have multiple road construction projects. Maybe it's a 694, maybe it's 394, right? If you're doing this repeatable thing and it's tied to a bigger picture or a bigger responsibility, write that down. Okay, but then get granular. What procedure is it that is taking you time? Is it phone calls that are taking you time? Is it emails? In our specific example, it's maybe collecting signatures for legal documents and making sure those legal documents are shared throughout the team, throughout the subcontractors, whatever that scenario may be. Okay, and then really, what is the purpose of that procedure? Again, if it's in our scenario, making sure that everybody has access to it, making sure that there's a standardized set of folders and files that they get to, that they know the structure of it. That would be the purpose of creating this opportunity here. And so to summarize, I guess the opportunity we're going to be talking about today and what we've built out for you is a method to easily organize, collaborate, and share legal documents. Someone would like to use Microsoft Teams to templatize a standard layout for each project. Okay, now if this scenario, if you're not into road construction, if you don't do this, use your imagination for this, right? What could be road construction for one company maybe is just a procurement process for another company. Okay, if you're the IT administrator who's thinking, okay, we don't really, I'm the IT administrator, I just want to know how to do this, start thinking of, again, the opportunities that maybe you could get involved to help build this solution. Okay, and with that would be coming the proving the ROI process, right? Because one thing to call out here is that the stuff that we're going to show you today, it's not a super easy process. It's time consuming. There may be development efforts in it. There may be something that you guys aren't familiar with that maybe you need to hire out. But proving the ROI of this repeatable process is a very important piece of this. Okay. So just why? Again, creating automated templates takes time to build and deploy. How do you calculate the ROI? You can use a basic formula to calculate time savings, and you can apply the formula to each process or task that you're doing. Of course, when you're doing this formula, don't forget other factors such as the fact that this process, this automated process, is going to simplify and standardize our procurement process, our digital process, our road construction process, right? And then who should see this ROI? I mean, that's really your business leader, right? Your manager. If you're the CIO of your company, maybe this is something that just you need to go out and hunt for and look to see if there's opportunity to do this. But use the ROI to justify the expense and time it takes to build this process out. And so a formula at the bottom, extremely simple. You guys probably have already worked through this in your head, but basically take the time spent on a manual task times how many times you do it a month times the cost of doing that per hour, and then multiply that by 12 months out of the year. Okay, you're going to come up with this number, and you don't have to have exact figures, right? Maybe your company's bill back rate for your time is $80 an hour. Then use that just generalized $80 an hour in the formula to plug it in to be able to prove how much time the company or you are going to be able to save in your process. The solution that myself and Lief have built out here coming up, it's not only for time savings, but again, the big part of it is it's going to be for simplifying and standardizing processes. And those may be the tangents or the variables that you can't put ROI on, but try to come up with that number to help prove it out.
Yeah, that's a good point, this standardizing, because when you think about governance and in teams, right, and groups, you can put some, naming policies or different items around it, but you only can go so far with it. So that's why even just having just a normal SharePoint list, I mean, minimum of a SharePoint list with approval process, you can control the naming convention, the sharing, the different details on that team site. So that's kind of crawl into it, and then you kind of open it up from there.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so now off to the fun stuff. Okay, this is the technical stuff that we all joined today for, right? Is how do we architect this? How do we create this solution? Okay, so first, when we're architecting something, we have to define the goal. So use the example I provided earlier, just for some context. For a road construction company, we have an employee named Jane whose process is to go collect signatures for legal documents, organize them in a centralized fashion, and then make sure people have sharing access to them or are able to collaborate on them. So that's the context around it. Now, what is the goal, right? The goal is to create a common data structure using teams that will isolate the data and the team members for each road construction project. Okay, we have some requirements. The requirements include group messaging, automated workflows, a tailored SharePoint experience, and a method for users to request new project spaces. Okay, because what might turn into one project on 494 could change into 100 more. And that's really the goal. So define that goal, make sure you are working with the business, with the users who are going to use this tool, and define that down to a T, okay? The next step then is just building it out. So I'm going to start with SharePoint. I'm going to keep this simple. We're not going to bake in Teams yet, because one of the requirements was to build a SharePoint site. All right, so what you're looking at here is a screenshot of the site I'm going to bring up shortly. Lief's the master designer here. But this is my perfect site that I could reuse for every single project I have. Up in the top right corner, there's a due date of the project. In the bottom right, it's a little map widget that tells where it's at. We have a standardized set of documents in here, and we have certain people that are members and owners of the site. Okay, go wild on this. So use your imagination, figure out what it is in SharePoint that you like and that you find value in, and build out that exact empty site template in SharePoint. Okay, so I'm going to switch windows here really quick and just walk you through this SharePoint site.
And I would just mention one thing. So we kind of focused on the SharePoint side of it as, thinking about that sales pipeline. So if we're a construction company, maybe the first part of it is it's in, beginning phase. It's not, the documents haven't been signed. We're not ready to go in that collaboration. So we could provision a SharePoint site and then convert that SharePoint site into a team site once it gets farther down that sales process. And in the template that Scott's going to be showing you here, and we can do similar templates to teams. We just did it a little different. So there's a couple ways to do this.
Yeah, and Lief, I would even say there's hundreds of ways to do this, right? Use your imagination when you're building this out. This is one way of many. We used Power Apps and Flow. You could use Logic apps. You don't have to use Power Apps at all. I mean, it's Microsoft the cloud, right? There's so many different ways to do this. There's no reason or method that we chose this one. It's just being from SharePoint, we're familiar with this.
And I would say when we do get to the heavy PowerShell and automation, we do that because those what we're trying to do is not available in Flow or Logic apps yet. So that could change over time.
Yep. So just walking you through this site again, widgets with the project due date. We have a weather widget. We have a project site widget. These are all just out of the box SharePoint web parts that have been customized and tailored with specific zip codes or addresses. Okay. We also have a document library that's tied into it, and we have a project sponsor and maybe some team leads. But now when you look at this, right, not everybody's going to be on the same project. You're not always going to have the same project sponsor. You're not always going to have the same location. You're not always going to have the same due date. So we need to be able to unplug this site and then plug it back in with our own settings. Okay, so what I'm going to show you next is basically how to do that. How do we take out all of the core functionality of SharePoint so we can parameterize it, so we can inject it with our own settings and then push it back in. Okay, so this is the site. The other thing that I want to show you here is as we go through the process, we have a master project list that we've been using to track this. Lief is going to go into this deeper too. But this is what's going to keep track of all of our new site requests as we build this out. Okay, so just keep that in mind when we're going through this process. I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint really quick to walk through the process, and then we're going to then we're going to do some PowerShell. Okay. Okay. So what we have now, again, is this perfect site. It's exactly the way we want it, and we've worked with the business, and maybe the business built it themselves, and this can be a repeatable solution. Okay, so now this is how we create the solution. So what we've done on the SharePoint side, actually for all of this, is we're using the PnP templates, the patterns and practices PowerShell module to build all of this out. Okay, so these are the steps that we're going to do to build this process. You guys are going to get this slideshow. You can download this video later. One thing I'll call out that me and Lief have ran into many times is that these modules are updated quite a bit. So just make sure you're on the latest module, because what was there a year ago maybe is not there today. Maybe the name changed or something. Okay, but this slide will be included. But what I'm going to do now is go ahead and share my PowerShell window.
Again, and so what Scott's doing with SharePoint, we could do it with the Teams. We're doing it a little different way. And I know we're talking a lot about SharePoint, but once we create the Teams, we're integrating those pages back into that project in Teams. Yep,
the Teams portion of this will come in a second here. Okay, so what you're looking at here is pretty much the same from the PowerPoint slide, and it's just stripped out so you can see the PowerShell here. First thing you're going to need to do is install the PnP PowerShell module. Okay, so that's on line 2, what I have highlighted there. The next step of getting this SharePoint site customized is it's going to be creating and modifying a config.json file that will include or exclude settings for that SharePoint site. Okay, now that was probably a heavy sentence, but basically the config.json file could be extremely simple. You might not even need one, to be honest with you. But if you want to get specific things and pull it out, this was the config.json file that we used. Okay, reading through this, basically we're saying bring over persisted asset files, so anything in the assets folder. We want to bring over the theme, the composed look, the settings, the site header, and the pages library. In our example here, we're going to exclude content types because Lief deployed a whole bunch of content types to our demo tenant back in the day, so we had to do that, and we didn't want to bring those across. And then we're going to include all of the pages library.
Hey, Scott, can you zoom in on that at all?
Let me try. I have a zoom here. Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so take a look at that again. This will all be provided in the slide deck, so no need to take notes or screenshots. You can get this afterwards. Now, the thing that I will tell you with this config.json file, okay, is there is a whole schema for it. I've also included the link right here. But the schema basically defines everything that you can strip out or include in your SharePoint site. And yes, I am still scrolling here. Okay, so if there's a specific list or list view or a list column that you want to include or exclude, you can build this out. All right, the PnP team has came up with a very robust configuration file that we can use. Okay, again, ours very basic. We're just doing some basic stuff here. Now that is this step where we go and create that JSON folder. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to connect to our site, that template site, which was named project, and then we're going to templatize that site out using the JSON file. Okay, so we're going to basically output a template file. Okay, now if you notice here in my directory, I only have 3 files in here right now. At the end, I'll show you the file, so I don't have to switch screens, but we're going to go ahead and connect here. Whoa. Just logging in. Okay, so I've connected to my project site. This is that perfect site that we created. Now I'm going to run the get PnP site template command. And if you can see here, the little scroll bars are going through. It's going and packaging up that site. It's pulling everything out of it. And what it does on this step is it actually will create that XML file. So if I do my directory again, you notice that we just created my template.xml file. Now this is an XML framework of everything on that site. So documents that we wanted to bring over with it, a folder structure that we wanted to bring over with it. Whatever you want, that standardized process, bring it over. We can do that. We can configure that. Okay. So if there's a set of policies and procedures documents, or if there's training documents or anything that you want to include in every single site going forward, that's easy. We just bring it over with us. Okay. So just to show you what this template looks like, I have another tab open, and now I'm zoomed in quite a bit. So hopefully this isn't overwhelming, but this is all the XML that is built out from that site. So you can see we have web parts, we have the Bing Map web part. I mean, everything with it is in this XML process. Okay. Now, if I flip back over to this, what we can do here to push this template down, it's very easy. Okay, so we're going to connect to my demo site. I'm going to log in again. Now, my demo site is one that I pre-built. I manually pre-built it just for purposes of demonstration. Okay, and then we're going to invoke this site template. This is the command that pushes down the XML file to my demo site. Okay, so this will take some time. If you guys have a lot of content in here, if there's a lot of files, it might take 5-10 minutes, right? So this is building out that site. And now I'm going to switch back over to my browser here so you can see what the site used to look like, and once it's done, what it looks like next. Okay, so Lief, can you see my browser?
You are good.
All right. So here was that demo site that I had before. I built it before, just a plain Jane SharePoint site. If I click the refresh button here, notice that we have this very nice, pretty copy of our perfect site that we created. All right. The other thing to notice is that nothing's changed on it. It has the same title. It has the same address. It has the same due date, right? That's really not what we want. We built out a really nice reusable site template. Feel free to go and do that all day long. It took us 3 minutes, right? But we want something that's custom to each project that we're going to do. All right. And so how do we do that? So flipping back over to PowerShell once again, hopefully everybody's not getting dizzy. So how do we do that? Okay. So this is where we're looking at steps 15 through 18. But basically, we have to modify that site.xml file. We have to do things like changing the template. We have to remove navigation nodes. Maybe we add navigation nodes. Whatever that is that makes your site look and feel the way it should, that's what we're going to do here. Okay. One of the really nice things we can do is we can parameterize variables in the site.xml file. Okay, so for instance, if we want to customize a title or an address for every one, let me see if I can find it now that we're zoomed in. And actually, it's already here, right here in this one. So we can parameterize this by putting these variables in the site.xml file. And then we will pass those variables later, once Lief takes over, to basically modify that page so it's exactly the way we've requested. Lief, were you going to say something?
No, you're doing good.
Okay, so parameterizing, right? So in my example here, we're going to parameterize the title. We're going to do the description, the address. We're changing that up a little bit, and due date. Again, many ways to do this. We're just putting this in a parameter variable, an array, and I'm preloading all of this stuff. Leif's going to show you a way easier way to do this going forward. All right, so now what we're going to do, that we've changed this entire site, is we're going to package it up by taking the XML and reading into a variable. And then we're going to save this XML as a PnP file. Okay, this PnP file that we've created is a bundled file. It contains all of the pictures, all of the assets, all of the everything. Okay, so that's why we're doing it. We're bundling it in a site template now that is reusable, that we could upload really anywhere and reuse it. Okay, and so let me just go to my directory again. You can notice we have this PnP file right here that is set up for parameterization. Okay, so now we have this bundled file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to our admin tenant, and the reason I'm doing that is just to create a site. I'm going to create a new site for us to play with. Okay, we're logged in. Okay, this looks, so what I'm going to do is create a site called M365 tenant template, and I am going to assign me the owner. This is PnP now built out a whole new group-based SharePoint site. Okay. We are now going to connect to this new site that we just created. Okay, I'm now connected to that new site. And now we are going to invoke that same template command we did above. But here's the bonus. The bonus is that we're going to be injecting all those parameters into that template. Okay. And again, this is the hard way of doing it. I'm doing it manually just to show you what manually doing it would look like. When Lief takes over, we're going to talk about automating this. Okay. And so let me go ahead and invoke. Actually, you know what? First, I'm gonna switch over to my browser just to make sure that site is built out. Okay, let me share the browser again. And let me go grab that URL. Okay, so here's our new site that we just built out. Notice it's a plain Jane SharePoint site. Okay, now I'm going to go back. You guys can't see this part, but I'm going to run the invoke PnP site template with our parameters. Actually, should watch the process here. It's going. All right, it's done. Now this process sometimes takes a few minutes to propagate through, but did it work? Yes, it looked like it worked. It worked here. Maybe these Bing widgets are still loading since it's getting passed through. But you can see I have an address change. I have a zip code change. The project due date has changed. I changed my title of the site to M365 user group. So use your imagination here, right? Again, what does that perfect site look like? Is it itemized permissions on a library? Is it specific users added to it? All right. Is it different web parts and widgets or different shortcuts? What is that repeatable process, that repeatable structure that we can do? Okay, and so again, what I've shown you so far is just on SharePoint. That was one of our requirements. It's templatizing a SharePoint site. I'm going to turn it over to Lief, who is going to talk about the rest of the process. Okay, so the automating side. We really haven't automated anything yet.
Yeah.
So Lief, you want to go ahead and take control?
Yeah. Do you just want to share the Visio, not the Visio, but the PowerPoint?
Yes.
And I'll show the flow we go through.
Yep. Let me switch to the PowerPoint here. Okay, so it says I'm presenting, so we're on to automating the solution.
There you go.
Here we go.
Awesome. So what we did is kind of built a whole process, and there's multiple layers of that process. We did a Power Apps. You could use a form. You could use a SharePoint list. We just did Power Apps because we like to embed it into a Teams channel, so you can do it right into Teams. So that Power Apps form gets the title, the sponsor, the team, our address, location, our due date of the project, those parameters, creates a SharePoint list item. In that SharePoint list item, it kicks off a Power Automate flow, and that takes the data from list, does a couple things to the data, and then passes that to the Azure automation job. So why we use Azure automation is because Flow can't do everything that we want it to. The good news is when we use Azure automation, we're only using the PnP modules for everything we do here. So once Azure automation takes those parameters, it then goes and provisions the SharePoint site. It converts the SharePoint site to a Teams. It adds a tab. It creates different channels in that Teams. Add members to that Teams channel as well. So let me just share my screen, and we will walk through that process, and then we'll kind of go look at the back end of each step and show you how it's done. Okay, just let me know when you can see.
Looks good.
Okay, so we just have a team called Project List, and this is where that list is as well on the SharePoint side. We created a Power Apps application, and we put that as a tab into our Teams channel. So a user could come in here. They want to create a new project. Let's say, we want to do Microsoft Fargo expansion, right? I'm not going to do road construction. I'll do building construction, a little different. We'll make Scott the kind of the sponsor. Scott the sponsor. There we go. and then we're going to add some team members. So let's add myself. Let's do head. And let's add one more person. Okay. So let's say the project details, Microsoft is looking to expand the Fargo campus by building a new building. We'll double up on building. Oop. All right, so we're gonna just put the address in here. So it's gonna be Fargo 3900. We'll Great Plains Drive South, North Dakota 58104, and let's pick a due date. So let's say it's gonna be July 18th. So we'll go ahead and hit submit here. And this will go ahead and create that SharePoint list item. So if we go to the SharePoint list, we have master project list. So this is the item I just created. So once this triggers or gets added, we have flow to start triggering to the Azure automation. So if we go now and look at the flow associated with that list, new project, workflow, we'll just wait for it to kick off. Now it's running. We can go in and see what it's doing. So we have when a new item is created, we're going to initialize a variable. And this is just because we have multiple members that we put for the team. So we're going to put that into a string. And then we're going to create this job. This is an Azure automation job. And I'll show you when you edit this once we kind of go to the Azure automation side. But when you do a create job and you select your Azure automation account and your runbook, whatever parameters you put will actually show up into this flow. But we'll come back to this. So this created the Azure automation job. Then we can go to our Azure automation runbook and we can look in. Now Azure automation's running. These are the parameters that we pass from the flow, and then we'll just give it a couple minutes to run. And let me just, well, I'll wait till it's created. And then Scott, if you want to see if it starts coming up on your side, just let me know.
Check. Lief, I see it. It's just building out still.
Okay. So it takes a little bit, and then we'll go through so if we look at the runbook, and we'll talk through this. These are all our parameters that we're passing from flow. So what I'm doing in here, and I'll just go through it really quickly, and then we'll kind of talk about how we have to set everything up. I have a function right here, and this is to get the latitude and longitude values from an address. So I actually send the address values to this URL. This is a Bing API, and I pull down the longitude and latitude. We then go down here and we have our parameters, and these are the parameters kind of like Scott showed you in his file when he was doing it manually. We have different channels we're going to be creating underneath that teams as well. So here is where we connect to the tenant, and I'll kind of show you just in a moment how we set this up. So we're not actually using any username and password credentials. We're using an app registration as permission to provision these items. We go ahead and we create the SharePoint site. We pass the alias of the site that we want and the sponsor. So Scott's going to be owner of that site because he was the sponsor. We then get the group that's associated to that SharePoint site. We add him as a group owner, and then we refresh it. This is just for error checking during the build process. He will be a group owner because of the SharePoint site. We just like to reevaluate that and make sure so the rest of the PowerShell doesn't fail, kind of a refresh check. We then go and apply the template to the SharePoint site. So we connect to that new site that we created, again, with the same app registration credentials. And then we invoke the PnP site template. So we uploaded that PnP file, that package template file, just to our project list SharePoint. So then we don't have to keep it in Azure storage or any temp location. So this will create the site, it applies the site, and now we're going to convert that to a Teams. So the new PnP Teams converts that SharePoint site to a Teams. And then we loop through our channels that we want to create under that Teams. And then these commands will create those channels. And then we move down to adding a tab. So we want to add a tab to our team. So that page that we designed that we're going to use for all the project details, what we did is added that now as a tab on that general channel. We then go down to members and we add all the team members that were submitted as members in the teams. And then this is just a housekeeping item I like to do is pre-provision the channels folders so users don't get an error right away. It's not a big deal, you can ignore it. So now if we go to our teams, we should see a team was created. We have our template that we just created as a tab underneath that. We have 4 different channels that were provisioned as well. Come on. Project details or files. In different items. So that was our main goal is taking, a project site, making it into a team site, adding different teams components, and then adding that project details back as a tab underneath that teams.
Yep, and I think to add to this, Lief, again, use your imagination here, right? The possibilities are almost endless. You noticed here on the left side on Lief's team menu, we just named it SNS-18, which is the item number of our list and the date. We could have named it Microsoft Fargo Campus Project Team or whatever it is. It's just what we picked for this. So by no way, this is how it needs to be.
I mean, it could be even smaller, right? You just want to automate a team's provisioning process where you could have a SharePoint library where someone submits a teams they want. You verify it. Maybe you fill out the team's name just to make sure that it's not taken or makes sense. You can hit approved. That flow could then go out and trigger Azure automation that creates the team for you. So it doesn't need to be as advanced as you want it. You can start off small. But let me, I'll actually go in to show you that kind of the edit of the flow and then show you how to create the Azure automation pieces to get it going. So if you look at our flow, I'm just going to edit here. So again, it's just when the item's created, and this could be a form that you're saving to SharePoint. It could be Power Apps. It could be just a SharePoint form that adds that list item. Then again, we're going kind of looping through the team members as there's multiple. And then if you look at the create job, all these parameters here come through as they were specified in the Azure automation piece. So when the first thing I could have done is I could have just created a new, and I'll just copy this out and show you. So if I went up to my Azure automation, I'll go back to the dashboard. So I could create a new run book, and let's do test run. This is going to be PowerShell. And I could, let's just do one, new. And if I save this and publish, and I went back to my flow, and let's say I just created a new job, add an action, create job. It is a premium connector, just a note, but when I create that job here, I can go here and select my Azure subscription, my resource group, my Azure automation account, and then I did that test run, and then it automatically brings over the parameters I need to send over to it.
And
So
one,
then-
one,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I was going to say one thing to keep in mind here too. This is a really important piece. Is we created this all through a Power App that is on another team, right? Just to utilize Teams as much as we can. That's not a constraint by any means. If you want to hook this up to a dynamic CRM system, if you want to hook this up to another incoming web job, something that some other portal that maybe is triggering this automation process based on another process, you absolutely can do that. All right. So for instance, if you are tracking sales leads, let's say through dynamic CRM, and you create a new lead and or a new sales lead, that could spin up this whole project process, this whole automation process. And let's say throughout that process in Dynamics, your sales team is changing it from lead to opportunity to actual project. We can fire different automation jobs that change colors, that change anything, that add more documents, that do different things to bring you through that whole cycle, whatever that cycle is.
Awesome. So, and going back to the Azure automation, so there's a couple pieces that you need to do to get going with the Teams the automation. It's create your automation account. So you're going to have an Azure subscription to do it. So once you sign up for Azure subscription, you come in here and you create your automation account, and then you will go down to your modules gallery. And this is where you can pull quite a bit of different items. For example, if we just wanted to do Microsoft Teams, there's the Microsoft Teams PowerShell that we could have done. I just wanted to do PnP.PowerShell as it did everything that we needed to do. But if I needed to do more advanced group stuff, maybe I would bring in Exchange. Online management, and each one of these kind of take different ways to authenticate. And I'll put some notes. I'll send some. I think we might have in the slide when we upload it. But for example, Exchange, you would have to create an app registration that run as an application to kind of connect through that module. But what I did here is I did PnP PowerShell, added that, and then those commands were available in my run books.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say some of the reasons why you might want to add Exchange or different modules is to expose those different settings. For instance, if you want that team email address to show up in your gal, if you want to change it from a public to a private, something that maybe isn't built in one module, you could add these other modules and tweak the settings even further.
Yep. So adding the module would be the first part, and then you got to figure out a way. You got to create that app registration. You got to have credentials to be able to connect. So you could technically use different credentials, but with most of the modern auth and the security stuff, you're going to run into issues. So what we recommend is the app registration or certificate. You could also use the new PowerShell secure store stuff that's coming out as well. But let me show you the permissions that we needed to create. And these are in the links. We have these links into the PowerPoint presentation as well. That it just walks you right through it. But let me go to Active Directory. And we created an app registration. So I'm going to go to app registrations. And I am actually in the wrong tenant. Let me switch tenants once. So if we go to app registrations, here is the app registration we're using. So when we authenticate, we have an application client ID and we have our tenant ID, and then I'm using a certificate. So I created a certificate, and I can actually create a certificate through the PnP also. So if you don't want to have to go through the process of figuring out how to do the self sign, you could just do new -PnP Azure certificate and create that. And then I uploaded the certificate to this registration. And then I gave the permissions I needed to create the teams, to create the SharePoint site, to create the group. So full control, and you probably could scale this down a little bit, but I mean, we need to be able to manage groups, pull and query different groups and changes. So I gave all of them, and then grant admin consent for this application on the tenant. So now if we go back into Azure Active Directory or Azure Automation, let me pull that up. Sometimes they don't have Azure in front of it. We're going to go into our Azure Automation account, and then I uploaded the certificate here as well. So I can query that with my application, and then I have a connection, and that connection is just linked back to that app registration. So if I go look at that app registration again, it gives me the details. It gives me the app ID, the tenant ID, and then again, I uploaded the certificate in both spots. And then I can use this in my runbook. So if I go back and look at that code that I was running when I connected, I'm getting that connection I created. So this is going to pull down that application ID that I'm storing and the tenant ID. And then I'm getting that certificate I uploaded to the Azure Automation account. And I'm using that combination to connect to Office 365 and the Graph API. So once I make that connection, so it's app only permissions. I don't need any username or password. And then I'm able to run through and do different things and then grab different, I'll have to grab different context when I go through different items.
So the difference then being from my example where I had to type in my username and password for every command is this is all behind the scenes. You don't need to touch it. There's no identity exposed. You don't need to expose your password to scripts or anything. So huge positive in the automation side of it.
Yep. Doesn't have to MFA, right? There's no conditional access that is going to put different restraints on it yet. They might come up with something. So, and that's kind of the main flow, right? It's Power Apps to SharePoint list to Power Automate Flow. That connects to Azure Automation, and then we use PowerShell to do different items. And again, and this is really customizable. If you want to add different channels, you could add more websites and tabs. You could add folder structure. And just because of how integrated Teams and SharePoint is, you could really make, use your imagination of what you want to provision. We just wanted to show you a basic construction template that our customer was looking at doing.
So Lief, I'll go ahead and take over again, and we'll just kind of recap what we just showed you. So I'll be sharing the PowerPoint again. All right, can you see it?
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. Yeah, so kind of in summary here, just walking through this slide that Lief left off on. Again, we use Power Apps here to actually submit the request for a new project. That gets logged in a SharePoint list. Power Automate was configured to monitor the SharePoint list. And once there was a new item created, it sent all of those details over to an Azure automation job. The Azure automation job does require an Azure subscription, so you'll need that. They're very, very cheap to run, just Runbucks. So what is it, $5 or $10 a month, Lief? It's not much, right?
Yeah.
So very, very cheap to do this. And then that Azure automation is really our playground where we can go and update all of those parameters. We can update the owners, the members, whatever else that we want to do. And then that actually creates the site. Okay, so just a couple more slides here. Just some housekeeping notes, right? You need to have the PnP module when you're doing the automation setup as well. Lief showed you how to add those modules into Azure. You have to create and register that app ID. That was the latest thing he just talked about. And then the parameters in the runbook are needed for Power Automate. Again, use your imagination here. If there's 100 different fields you want to capture, you could do that and really customize this. And then the last step is the code. And what we've done is just included some screenshots. Maybe this is actual text. It looks like text.
It's text, yep.
This is exactly what we've done in our demo here. There's different ways to do this, right? If the app registration doesn't fit, maybe Key Vault, whatever that is that you guys are standardized in your business, I would say choose that way instead, okay? But here's all the code that Lief did in that environment in the runbook. Okay, and then it includes everything from adding team members and whatnot. And so I will share my screen one more time on the browser. Is this it? I think this is it. Is this my browser here? Lief, what are you looking at right now?
I see Teams.
Okay, a Teams tab, perfect. Okay, and just like Lief had seen the different teams and we'll call them projects on his screen, right? I was added to this latest one as well as I think I was a member, Lief. Was I a member or the sponsor?
Yeah, and I see your other teams. I don't.
Oh,
I see our. Yeah.
Okay, that's the wrong team.
Too many teams
open. All right, how about right here? That's probably better.
There you go. Yep.
All right, perfect. So, okay. So as you can see here, I'm added to everything, the projects that Lief's added me to. I can see all those channels that he's created, and we can get to those tabs. And from there, we of course have the link to the SharePoint site because this was a big deal for our collaborator that they wanted to see this. And again, I have access just like I would. So from this point forward, the automation is complete, right? This should be your cookie cutter template in Teams. This should be your cookie cutter template in SharePoint. From there, any managing it, any adding additional team members or removing team members is going to be the same Teams greatness as it's always been. And, you know, big picture wise, you can do this as many times as you want for different purposes. There's really no limits into how you use this. I think the other thing that you have to think about with this is the, you know, not necessarily data sprawl that we talked about, but just what are the different phases of this project, all right? Is this project an open, pending, and closed status, or a start and stop status, or is it a sales process where it's going from lead to opportunity to an actual project, right? Think of those different phases because we can use that same process of pushing down a template to change the color of the template, to change the libraries you see, to change the widgets, whatever that process looks like as it's going through it, we can customize the look past this even. And I think that's a huge benefit, right? Because now if you automatically go to this SharePoint site and you notice the banner is green instead of blue, right? You should instantly know that, oh, hey, this is an actual sale, or this is actually something going on. And instead of just, you know, maybe trying to go through and look for a status field. So there's lots of things you can do beyond this. With that, I'll just go ahead and share my PowerPoint one last time. And I noticed there hasn't been many questions in the chat window. So we will go on to the questions phase of this. If there's anybody that was confused by anything, wants to dive anything deeper, feel free to type it in chat or go off of mute and let us know. And there's got to be at least somebody. So somebody needs to give us a question here. And I'll start picking names. Chad Riley. Anybody?
Scott,
Looks like
is
we
this
have something in
available
there.
for us in the GCC?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. The GCC will have all of this functionality here. The one thing that I would maybe question with that is the integration, the embedding Power Apps in the Teams. If you can do that, then we should be good. Just because in the GCC side, there was some limitations on Teams integrations with like SharePoint sites and whatnot. So that would be the one spot that I'd want to check.
And we have a question in chat, guys.
Question.
Ryan asks, any suggestions if you have hundreds of projects, how do you manage the nav?
What we've done with our different customers, we actually, when we were doing that project list, we use that project list to build a search or a master project list portal. And then when you do that, you can actually do different formatting on those columns to actually have the Teams link instead of the SharePoint link. So then we can redirect to different items in Teams. But it's creating a modern search page in SharePoint that's able to filter those down, is how we did it. But yeah, otherwise, if you're a member of 1,000 sites, right,
Yeah.
it's going to show.
Yeah, I don't think you have a option outside of doing automation like that or using search to be able to find it and scoping it as much as you can. You're right. Anybody else? All right. I think we got it done, guys. Nice job.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Again, Don, you've already given us an upload link for the content, correct?
Somebody will be if they haven't already.
Perfect. Yep. So all of this content will be available for everybody to download, and the recordings can be found where, Don?
Same place. We'll have it all. It's all going to be on the MN.org or MN365.org site.
And Scott, you have one more question. How do you change the config.json file?
Yeah. Okay, great. So let me pull that up. So we're going to share my PowerShell window. So again, the config.json file, it's if you don't technically need this config JSON file, okay? If you don't use it, it brings over everything in that perfect project site that we created, everything. So navigation, it'll add just the default features, the default widgets, things like that. This config.json file for SharePoint is only if you want to tailor what you're bringing over, okay? So maybe there's 5 document libraries. What we could do in that scenario is we could add lists to the handlers, and then we would add a section below this called lists, and it's something like, just for an example here, document library 1, and then we have PM docs and whatever other documents it is, super secret docs. Okay, so this config file, again, only needed if you want to tailor what you're bringing and downloading from that site.xml file. Now, how do you know what's out there? How do you know what's available? That's where I mentioned this developer link here. And this is, we have, I believe we have this in the PowerPoint. If we don't, we will.
Yeah, I just pasted it into the channel as well.
Perfect.
That talks through it, and it has a link to that schema.
Yep, there's a couple articles online that walk through this schema. What this is below here is everything that is available to you. So again, by no means do you need to have it be 10 pages long like it is. But say, for instance, if you wanted to do site security, it looks like it's a Boolean value. So we could do something like false which would not bring over site security, or true, that would, right? So it's all just a JSON file. You all just have to go through and see what different available options are to you, and then format it as a JSON object. And the best example I can give you without bringing up some websites is this example here, where we have persistent handler or persistent files, handlers, lists, and content types as the objects we're bringing. Great. All right.
And then Ryan, your follow-up question, it's hard because when you think about projects, you know, just if you don't have a way in SharePoint to track the projects, you're not going to have an easy way outside to search for it. So if you were just, you know, if they had that hundreds of projects and teams, they're just going to have to use the team search, which can delay, and it's not as quick as the SharePoint. Otherwise, we would create like a master tracking list in SharePoint that has all the metadata, and we would build a search portal page where we can refine and search on different criteria to narrow it down. But it would have to be something custom that we would track and look at.
Yep. And your question, in the GCC, is there a specific Azure subscription? No, there's not. The only thing that you want to make sure is whatever region you're deployed in. So say if everybody's central here, that you have Azure automation available to that region. And I think it's everywhere. I'm pretty sure Azure automation is everywhere.
And when we did this demo, we actually jumped tenants. We weren't in the same tenant. So we were actually doing our automation on our main Sky North demo tenant. And then we were connecting to actually a demo tenant. So they weren't even related, but with the app registration, that allows us to do that jump over. So even if you had GCC Cloud, you could still provision that Azure resources on, you know, just commercial Azure if you wanted to. So you do have flexibility where you put it.
Yep, good point. I'm going to jump over to one more thing too, related to Tony's question about the JSON file. Okay, this was the site.xml. So this is the output of all the objects on that site. There is a manual cleanup you can do to this too. So for instance, these are all of our web parts and dividers. If I don't want those to come across, I can just delete that before I actually package it. Now you got to be careful. We don't want you to break anything because it's XML, it's finicky, right? But you can, part of mine and Lief's process is going through here and cleaning up all the garbage that we don't want. Now this is just a very basic template because we wanted to simplify it, but you do have the option to clean up, you know, any object in here that you didn't want to bring across. So that's a manual way of doing it. The JSON way is kind of, I'll call it the more automated way, but helps you determine that. Another question, does PnP allow you to use the lists you provision for a project as a lookup columns and content types for that site collection? So is that okay? So is that regarding just lookup columns? And if one list has a lookup column to another list, like a parent child?
Yeah, I mean, so PnP does. I mean, you can pull the lookup values from different lists or pass it through flow or different items. But yeah, you can. I mean, PnP was based on SharePoint first, so you're going to be able to enumerate and connect to whatever you specify, really.
Yeah, and if I'm reading into this right, let's just say you did build out that perfect project site with two lists. One is a parent, one is a child, and one is a lookup column. That functionality would come across to the template.
And Ryan, you have your hand up too if you want to just jump in.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, like, as you provision a project and you create content types in that project and you're creating lists in that project, can you use the list that you're creating as lookup columns within those content types that are specific to that project? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're going to create content types and then you want to create a list and add those content types to that list, right?
Yes, as lookups.
Yep, you would just have to create the content type first. Yep.
Okay.
And if you did, so if you actually did a PnP provisioning template and included the content types and the list items, they're just going to come over together. So if you designed a site and you had these content types with different lookups to different lists, all that's going to move over.
Okay, thank you. I was worried that the content type would look to the list
The original
template and not the created list and the provisioned list.
No, yeah, you would just, in that config section, you would have to move those content types over. So they'll get recreated in the new site.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yep, and Nash with Microsoft did just paste in some GCC stuff. So Ann, Chad, Marcus, everybody on the GCC side, feel free to bookmark that. Great. Well, again, everybody, thank you for joining. It looks like we had a great turnout here. Thank you to Don and the M365 user group team. You guys always put on great events. And if everybody has any questions outside of this, just feel free to reach out through Teams, through email, through LinkedIn. Either way, we're definitely here to help.